Well, I'm off. Then I'll see you in 3 days.
My husband was in a good mood when he said he had a company trip to go on. The irony is that he also said it was the busiest season at his office. In retrospect, I really don't know why I sent him off despite my discomfort with these extremely contradicting truths. I really ought to have searched for clues to potentially uncover the real truth about all this. Around noon, that very same day, my husband's cell phone, the one he used for professional affairs, started to ring nonstop. At first, I really didn't pay it any attention, and then I put it on silent mode. As time went on, and as the calls kept on coming without any sign of stopping, I began to get worried as a chilling possibility occurred to me. Maybe something terrible had happened to him on his company trip, and his boss and coworkers were desperately trying to get a hold of me. A part of me was still reluctant to answer a phone call that was obviously meant for my someone else, but I decided to answer it next time it rang. That one singular action of answering the phone sent my life as I knew it tumbling down into a spiral of chaos and despair. That one phone call allowed me to realize that my husband had been lying to me this whole time, and the other person on the other end proposed a certain plan to maybe fix the situation. This is the story of how my husband stabbed me quite brutally in the back, metaphorically, of course, and how I teamed up with multiple strangers to bring him and his heinous actions to justice. My name is Frederique Hilton, and I'm a 30-year-old housewife. My maiden name is Cornat, and as you can probably tell, I have a traditional French name. My grandparents immigrated to the States during the war and put down roots here in New Mexico. Why New Mexico? I've honestly no idea. Mom is their daughter, and she was brought up bilingual in English and French, and she made it a priority that I was brought up the same. Thankfully, Dad was totally fine with that, having spent 15 years of his professional life in France himself, building up experience in the cooking industry. He and I spoke French with Mom and spoke English to each other. This environment is honestly irrelevant to the story, but I just wanted to get some things out of the way. My husband, Johann, who's German-American himself, and I have been married for 3 whole years this year. I met him when we were in college. Although we were in different faculties and different seminars, we met through our common passion of tennis, and as we practiced together, we hit it off and ended up becoming a couple. After graduation, my husband and I started working for different companies, but we continued with our relationship, and on our 5-year anniversary, he proposed to me and we got married about a year later. I resigned from my job soon thereafter and became a full-time housewife. At first glance, our married life seemed to be pretty normal, but in fact, there was one concern I had. I didn't spend enough time with my husband.
I'm in the midst of a very important time at work. It's a busy season, of course, but if I do well here, I could get a promotion. That would be great for you too, wouldn't it?
That's true, but
I'm letting you be a full-time housewife without you having to go to work every day, so I would appreciate it if you weren't so selfish.
I'm sorry. Johann had been working extra hours during the week, went to work on the weekends, and went on frequent business trips for the last year, and was away from home more and more often. If that was reflected in his salary and paid back as living expenses, I might have been less dissatisfied. However, the bacon he brought into the house budget had not changed at all, despite all these efforts to do extra work. It was he who managed the family bank book, so I didn't know much about the details, but anyone with common sense would be skeptical of what was really going on in his life. Last year, about 2 months after he started working extra hours, I asked him once, "Hey honey, the general cost of groceries went up these days, what with the rising prices and such. Considering how little money for housing expenses we have every month after all the grocery shopping, I was wondering if you could provide a bit more for groceries." To which he answered, as he gave me a skeptical look,
I can't provide any more money, Frederique. We just can't afford any more. We're running out of money too.
"Really? I thought we had enough money, since you've been working extra hours pretty often these days." When I said something like that, Johann for some reason didn't know what to say.
Oh, well, you know, I mean, I do make more, but because of all the extra hours, there are more instances where I'm invited out to drink and socialize. You know, you probably don't understand that as a housewife.
Maybe you're right. In the end, he did not agree to increase our living expenses. So I had no choice but to pay the shortfall in food expenses from my own savings from when I was still working. Then, one day, my husband came home and took out a travel agency brochure from his bag. "What's this brochure? Are you going on a trip?" When I asked him about the brochure, he answered,
We're going on a company trip next month. I'll be gone for 3 days.
"Ah, I see. But still, a company trip is a bit sudden, isn't it? You've been working for this company for about 8 years now, and this is literally the first time something like this has happened, isn't it?" When I mentioned this to my husband, he looked surprised. His eyes swam a little before he said,
Remember how my old boss retired last year and a new department manager was assigned to replace him? He's very proactive about getting his team to have good relationships between each other. Surely you remember him, right? We were both invited to a barbecue around Christmas time.
"Oh, yeah, I remember now." And I legitimately did remember such a barbecue. If I remember right, it was December 21st when a nice barbecue was held to celebrate the promotion of my husband's then senior colleague, now boss, Mr. Dominici. He is a very kind man with an admirable work ethic, and his wife, Valerie, is a perfect match for him. I remember that the rest of the team were all very kind and gregarious too. That brings back memories. Come to think of it, that's the last time you had a company get-together, isn't it?
Well, that's true. You see, things have been very busy and hectic at work lately.
Really? And yet there are company trips? I pointed out, to which he replied with a sour grin.
That's not the point.
Is that so? I was concerned about Johan, who seemed to be in a hurry. I wondered if a company trip would really take place when his workplace was as busy as he claimed it to be. I didn't know much about my husband's workplace, but I did know that Mr. Dominici was a well-respected individual who had a way with words. If it was a company trip planned by such a boss, it would be a nice break for everyone on the team, including Johan himself. And with this in mind, I did not think too much about the company trip after that day. However, my intuition wasn't at all satisfied. For some reason, and as many of you probably know, a person's intuition, particularly a woman's, is often right. While the logical side of myself forced the string premonition of doomsday somewhere that no one dare attempt to touch, I later came to realize that sometimes such a hunch can save yourself far earlier. A month later, Johan left for the company trip with a large carry-on suitcase in his hand. "Bring me back a souvenir or two, will you?"
Yeah, of course. You leave that to me. I'll pick out something you'll like.
We exchanged such a brief conversation, and I saw him off with a smile on my face without any doubts. It was around noon that same day, and having been freed from housework for the first time in a long time, I was relaxing, eating Oreos and watching TV. Suddenly, I heard the ringtone of a cell phone coming from somewhere. A phone call? Is it from Johan? I checked my own phone, but it was still a dark screen, without any name popping up or any sounds emanating from it. The sound was not coming from my pocket, and I then realized it was coming from my husband's room. As though an invisible hand was guiding me, I headed to his room. My ears perked up, and I walked over to where the sound seemed to be coming from, and there it was, his phone. The one he used for professional affairs was right under his pillow. "Oh, this is Johan's professional phone. It looks like he forgot it." The number didn't have a name, so I didn't pay it much attention. I picked up the phone, put it on silent mode, and returned to the living room. Soon, the TV program I was watching was over, and I turned off the TV. At that moment, I noticed something again. My husband's phone, which I had just put on silent mode, was beeping and vibrating. Another phone call. I thought and started ironing without paying much attention to it. Then, a few minutes later, it happened again. I heard his phone vibrating from my husband's bedroom. This happened several times over the course of 20 minutes, and right when I was beginning to get a little annoyed, I began to get worried as a chilling possibility occurred to me. Maybe something terrible happened to him on his company trip, and his boss and coworkers were desperately trying to get a hold of me. Or, even if it wasn't the worst case scenario, they must be trying to contact me. Something important must be coming through. With this thought in mind, I decided to answer the next incoming call. I brought the phone from my husband's bedroom and put it in the living room, and within a few minutes, it was vibrating once again. Hello? I answered the phone with trepidation, but the voice on the other end of the line sounded familiar.
Thank God you finally picked up. I'm sorry. I know you asked for a day off. But this is pretty clear matter, pal. It's Harris, the new guy you're in charge of nowadays.
He started talking quickly, but I quickly interrupted him by saying, Hello, Mr. Dominici? This is Frederique, Johan's wife.
Oh, Miss Hilton. I must say, this is an unexpected surprise.
Yes, indeed, that was Mr. Dominici, Johan's boss, the same individual whom I once met at the aforementioned barbecue. Yes, it's been a while, sir. I'm sorry, it seems my husband forgot his cell phone. The next moment, Mr. Dominici said something I didn't quite understand.
Are you feeling all right, Miss Hilton?
I didn't know what he was talking about and fell silent for a while. Perhaps sensing my confusion, Mr. Dominici continued.
I heard from Johann that your condition had worsened.
Condition, sir? What do you mean? When I asked him that, he answered curiously.
You've been hospitalized because your chronic disease has worsened, haven't you?
Excuse me? I'm afraid you're mistaken, sir. I don't have any chronic illness at all.
Really?
There was a moment of silence between the two of us. It was clear we had no idea how to proceed onward. It was Mr. Dominici who was the first to open his mouth after what seemed like hours.
Wait a moment, please. I need to get something straight here. Mr. Johann Hilton filed for 3 consecutive days off to take care of his wife.
No, sir. I'm perfectly fine, and I don't need any care whatsoever. Isn't he going on a company trip?
What? Company trip?
Mr. Dominici said in a loud voice.
Pardon my outburst, ma'am. There's no such thing as a company trip, though. Our company's right in the middle of a busy season as of now, and we don't have any time at all for that.
Our conversation was not going anywhere, but it seems to be an undeniable fact that my husband had been lying to both of us. My husband seems to be up to something mischievous, it seems. When I mentioned this to Mr. Dominici, he agreed with me.
It really does seem so. By the way, is it right that Johann will come home from this company trip in 3 days' time?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And do you know where the destination is?
Mr. Dominici asked me that as if he was interrogating me. Perhaps an idea had been forming in his mind, just as how something in particular began to take form in my own mind, starting around then. I answered in a puzzled manner. Well, I haven't heard many details, but I do believe it's somewhere in Mexico.
I'll look into it.
I decided I should do a little research myself, so leaving Mr. Dominici on call, I took the computer from Johan's room and turned it on. I then went through the internet search history, and sure enough, here it is. I found the reservation history of a certain hotel's website in one of them. The hotel was called Business Hotel and Suites, Maria Bonita, located in Ciudad Juarez, which is arguably the northernmost city in Mexico. A nice room was reserved for 2 people, a man and a woman, and it was for 2 nights and 3 days. When I told Mr. Dominici the location of the hotel, he breathed out for a long time thoughtfully.
Ma'am, if you don't mind, I'd like to have another word with you.
I held my breath as he continued to speak. 3 days later, Johann, who knew nothing about my plan with Mr. Dominici, came home in a good mood. He presented me with a souvenir he had bought over in Ciudad Juarez, and he began to talk happily.
Sorry I was gone for 3 days, but thanks to this trip, I was able to get to know my boss well, and I now think he and I would be a great team together.
He smiled coldly, never accepted the gift, and instead uttered 11 simple words that changed everything. Well, I didn't know your boss had turned into a woman.
Huh? What are you talking about all of a sudden?
I offered him a photograph in silence. You spent 3 days with this woman, didn't you? Johann looked like he had been shot in the chest with a 12-gauge shotgun at point-blank range, but only for a moment, before quickly replying as though he was trying to make up an excuse for such a photograph.
Yes, of course. She's my boss.
Oh my, are you really going to make more stupid excuses, even in this situation? Did you forget that I know exactly who Mr. Dominici is, along with his wife, Valerie? I was at that barbecue last Christmas, too, remember? My husband's eyes widened. He began to break out into a cold sweat. And you also just said that you now get along famously with your boss, Mr. Dominici, right? Then you can explain to me why that same boss of yours called me literally 10 minutes ago to tell me the news that you were going to lose your job within a week.
Huh? What are you talking about? You've been talking codswallop for too freaking long now.
As soon as Johan started raising his voice like that, an even louder voice echoed through the entire house.
You're the one who's been talking freaking codswallop, buddy.
Mr. Domicini? Here?
Yes, indeed, waiting in the other room, hearing every single word that was going on between Johan and I, was my husband's real boss, the male Dominici.
When in the name of time immortal did my wife become your boss?
And the woman in the picture I showed Johan, which was on the table at that point, was the female Dominici. In other words, Valerie, the wife of Johan's boss.
Well, that's...
Listen, bucko. You betrayed your wife in this way by setting her up as this frail character in the hospital suffering from a chronic illness. Do you have any damn idea of the severity of the scandal you've created? How do you think your wife felt when she saw this photograph for the first time? Let me tell you, since you weren't there to witness it, let's just say she's not going to smile for quite a while after all this.
Mr. Dominici looked at me apologetically and sympathetically. Johan immediately fell silent. He wasn't done yet, though.
My wife also said that she was going to travel to Mexico with a few friends for 3 days. She was away from the home for 3 days straight, and I just happened to call Miss Hilton here on the phone. It didn't take 30 seconds of talking before we both knew something was wrong. I asked Frederic to find out where you were going, and I asked an acquaintance of mine who works at a detective agency in Juarez to get the information.
He grabbed the photographic evidence on the table and fluttered it as he said so. Yes, indeed. This evidence and the fact that Mr. Dominici was here now was all his idea that day. We both decided to sanction Johan and Valerie during that phone call that afternoon. I explained to my husband in a very polite manner. Yes, phone call, or rather, phone calls. You left your company phone here, didn't you? I said, and he said that with a great deal of force.
And you had the authority to answer that phone call?
Yes, I did. I thought it was important, or that something terrible had happened to you. The phone just would not stop ringing.
How freaking could you? And you even checked where I was going? How?
Well, here it is. I opened up my husband's computer.
This is an invasion of privacy.
He screamed. In this kind of situation, I don't think something like this is going to hold up very much in court. If this ever goes that far, that is. I couldn't help myself right then, and I didn't even think when I yelled back. I then added, "We're getting a divorce." In my words, Johan replied without any sign of energy or passion in his voice.
I don't want a divorce. I don't want a divorce. All you have to do is forgive me, right? No big deal. I just wanted to have some fun because I was pretty busy with work.
He pleaded desperately, without saying a word of apology until the very end. The last sentence of his was quite possibly the most hurtful of all. If he was so busy with work, that was all the more reason to be eager to come home and get pampered by his wife, was it not? The fact he wanted another woman to do what was supposed to be my job spoke for itself. He didn't love me, never had, never will, and I had wasted 10 years of my life for an asshole like that. I swallowed any lingering sign of sadness in my voice before calmly retorting, "It's my decision. I can't forgive you. We're done." As I said this, Mr. Dominici added,
Divorce isn't the only thing you ought to be worried about, buddy. As your wife just mentioned, you're fired.
Why?
Mr. Dominici turned his back to the groveling, pathetic figure that kneeled before him, crying tears which pleaded mercy.
Do we have to explain every single thing to you? Christ above, man. You're 30 years old. Why don't you put your hand on your heart and think about it,
Mr. Dominici promptly left thereafter. As though I was following him myself, I grabbed my luggage and left the house. Behind me, I could hear the bastard's sobbing voice, which was uttering words of apology now, of all possible times. But it was already too late. My resolve was unshaken. Later, Johan and I finally divorced, and my ex-husband was fired from his job, just as Mr. Dominici had declared he would. However, this was not something that was decided solely based on his personal grudge against him. In professional circumstances, someone can only be officially fired from their job if the reasons show that the actions of a particular employee has consequences upon the reputation, the working environment, the working performance, the investments, and many other aspects of a company. In other words, officers need hardcore evidence of an employee's ill behavior and its link to negative trends in the workplace as of late. They cannot fire someone just because they banged their wife. According to what Mr. Dominici told me in detail, Johan had been constantly absent from work on the pretense that he was nursing me. As a result, even during the height of the busy season, he would push all the pretty crucial pieces of work to colleagues younger and less experienced than he, and the entire team was complaining about being told to do more work. In reality, he lied about taking care of his wife and spent all the time he could spare with Valerie. It seems that Mr. Dominici has since divorced his wife, and now both Johan and Valerie are at a loss in life because of the alimony claims from both myself and Mr. Dominici. My ex-husband ran out of savings and asked his parents for help, but they knew everything. They firmly refused his request to help him and have disowned him, refusing to provide any support of any kind. They came all the way to my parents' house to apologize and declare that they too would never forgive their son for this treason. As for me, I told Mom and Dad everything, and that I wanted to stay with my parents for a while, and they welcomed me warmly. Frederique, darling, you take it easy, okay? For the sake of the story, let's assume Mom spoke in English. In reality, she spoke in French.
If there's anything we can do for you, sweetheart, just let us know. All right?
My parents agreed to let me stay at their house until my life became stable once again. I recently had my final interview and successfully found a new job. From now on, I'm going to put all my energy into my new job and start again with a clean slate. I put on a new suit, walk out the door, look up at the clear sky, take a deep breath, smile, and marched onward toward a better life.